Coming to you live from a cabin deep in the heart of the Canadian wilderness. Turn down the lights, get yourself a drink, and let's settle in for tonight's broadcast. Good evening, and welcome to Midnight Mysteries. Here are your hosts.
Hello, Midnighters. Welcome back to Midnight Mysteries, the heart of Canadian paranormal radio. My name is Nathan. Tonight, we have a special announcement, and it has to do with our guest for tonight's show. But first, if you enjoy talking about current world news and historical events with a paranormal perspective, join the Midnighters family by clicking subscribe and follow us on social media. We want to explore the unknown together. We're excited to announce that Midnight Mysteries is starting up a new segment called Things That Go Bump in the Night. Our in-studio episodes will continue with Mike and myself, but Things That Go Bump in the Night will be between myself and a new co-host, where we interview guests from all over the world. Guests covering topics like shadow beings, skinwalkers, UFOs, real-world conspiracies, and all the things that go bump in the night. So for tonight's episode, I'll be introducing and interviewing our new co-host, Theresa Cassar. Theresa is from the Spiritual Gangsters Podcast and also sometimes co-hosts the NY Patriot show and the Occult Rejects. Theresa likes to cover news and current events, religion and spirituality, history and its occult influences. Her favorite paranormal topic is a fascination with exorcism and the spiritual laws of the demonic realm. Theresa, welcome to the team and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here and grateful for this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to getting to know the Midnight Mysteries community and being on Things That Go Bump in the Night.
Yeah, we're thrilled for you to be a regular. I know a few people who follow your show and tune into your streams, and
Oh, nice.
yeah, everybody
Very
seems to, almost everybody seems to love you.
Oh, okay. They don't know me very well, obviously. So, no, I'm kidding. That's awesome, though.
So something we like to start off with all of our guests, and I think it's a perfect introduction to who you are as well. But in terms of your background, in terms of your belief in spirituality and the paranormal, did you grow up with it? Did your family talk about it? Did your grandparents whisper about it? Or did you grow up in a family of skeptics? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so for me, I was raised pretty religious. So, I'm Italian, so Catholic background, pretty
Hey.
typical. Hey, yo. Exactly. Pretty religious and pretty strict, I would say, compared to a lot of other people that I knew. Not fanatical by any means, but the traditional stuff. I grew up going to Catholic church, always had a fascination actually with the Blessed Mother, Mary. So my mom was very into different Marian apparitions where she's appeared, messages she's given. And as a child, I just always felt very open spiritually.
Right.
So I had a lot of questions, even though I was raised, a certain way. I didn't understand why we have certain traditions. Why do we believe certain things? Why do
Sure.
we have to go to confession? All
Yeah.
these sorts of questions I think a lot of Catholics probably have growing up.
Yeah.
And I think that frustrated my family a lot.
Mm.
So through growing up, more into my teens and early 20s, I actually got very into yoga, and practicing it at first for physical reasons and fitness and health. And then I got more into the spiritual side of it as well.
Right.
And it just sort of opened myself up to different possibilities, learned a lot about Buddhism. I had a Buddhist monk for a teacher in my yoga teacher training.
Oh, interesting.
He was really cool.
Yeah.
And
Was
Hinduism
he
as
was he
well.
like an urban Buddhist monk where he just dressed in everyday
Yes.
clothes? Nice.
Yeah. His name actually is Frank Jude Baccio. I think he
Oh,
lives
wow.
in New
Yeah.
York. Yeah, he's Italian also,
Yeah.
which was cool because we had a similar upbringing.
Yeah.
but then similar questions. So
Right.
it's just like opened myself up to all these different, modes of thinking in the more Eastern philosophies,
Okay.
which I can only say like just broadened my perspective, let's
Sure.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
you grew up in a Catholic household, and then as you got older, you start to kind of open your mind or broaden your
yeah,
horizons a
I
bit.
wouldn't say I like rebelled per se, but I always was like one foot in, one foot out
Sure. Yeah.
sort of deal. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think
exactly.
that's very typical to myself too. Like grew up hearing all ghosts are demons, like every
Mm,
single one. But then I look at the
right.
Bible, I'm like, well, wait, there's
Mm,
ghosts in the Bible, like
yeah,
real spirits from the
exactly.
dead talking. And so I knew it wasn't quite as black and white as some people have
Exactly.
made it out to be.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say my parents were like ghosts aren't real or anything like that. I think they were sort of just like, yeah, for sure, that probably exists, but they didn't like fixate on it. They were never like obsessed with Halloween because I
Right.
know some families are like that. My grandmother actually is very into horror movies,
Oh,
and
interesting.
like I am not. I
Yeah.
cannot watch like a typical horror movie, but
Yeah.
yet I have other fascinations with other like things that go bump in the night. So,
Sure.
you know, but
What's her favorite horror movie?
I don't know. I'll have to ask her what's her favorite. She likes being scared,
Okay. Yeah.
which I don't understand. I'm like, why do you like that? But I guess it's the adrenaline and all
Yeah.
that, right? Like
Yeah.
anyone else. But yeah, so but I actually also as a young child, like I don't know if it was like real or whatever, but I remember being in church one time in mass, and personally, I do think that I saw like a vision of like Mary in like the flame of a candle on the altar,
Mm,
and it like stayed for quite some time. And I told my mom about it after, and she was like, "Well, yeah, it could have been." Like
right.
she didn't like shame me about it or anything. So
Yeah.
and my parents have told me stories of things that have happened in their lives that they believe was, something else from another realm,
Sure.
usually in a positive way or a deceased loved one. My mom probably has had angels intervene in her life
Oh,
a couple
interesting.
times, like to save her
Yeah.
life. So,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah. I think in even in Hebrews it says be careful how you treat strangers because you could be
Yeah,
entertaining an angel. And
that's
yeah,
exactly like what happened to her.
yeah.
Very
So
interesting stories.
think twice before you honk at that person in front of you.
Right? Maybe they're blocking you for a reason.
Yeah.
Never know, right?
Okay, so you grew up, you broadened your horizons. Was there a specific red pill moment? Was it that apparition you saw in the flame, or would you say it was just kind of all these things combined that
Yeah, no, I don't think there was like one thing in regards to the paranormal. I just always grew up believing that there's possibilities for sure beyond our view or physical understanding, physical senses.
Sure.
Definitely, yeah.
So how did that lead you to running your own podcast and getting involved with NY and Occult Rejects? Like how did you go
Right.
from just being interested and curious to being like, this needs to be talked about?
Right. Yeah, for sure. So I guess we'll have to go a little bit back in time to answer the question fully. So
Okay.
like my waking up story,
Yeah.
which I always ask people on the Spiritual Gangsters podcast. That's
Mhm.
like the opening question is like, how did you wake up? So I'll tell you
Yeah.
my story.
That's our red
Right?
pill question. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So for me, it was, I think, not really one specific moment. For me, more so growing up, I was always fascinated with like popular culture, movies, TV, journalism. I was just very into like what's going on in media. And I remember taking like an aptitude test in high school. And it's just one of those people who like this sounds this is gonna sound wrong, but I'm good at a lot of things, but not great. I'm not great at like
A
anything
humble
in
brag.
particular.
That's a humble brag.
No, but
Yeah.
it's like a jack of all trades,
No, yeah, I
master
get it.
of
Yeah,
none,
yeah.
sort of situation. So on my aptitude test, it was like, you'd be great at advertising. And I was like, all right. So in my head, as a 16-year-old, I was like, oh, I should go into advertising. So that was always like my thought in my head of some sort of career I could succeed in when I grow up. So to do that, I studied it's called Media, Information and Technoculture
Oh,
at the University of Western Ontario.
okay.
So like kind of a newer program at the time, very much basically media studies, communications sort of type of program, but heavy on the theory of it. So a lot of like the geopolitical stuff and the historical stuff, philosophy, very interesting. Totally prepared me for the current times.
Right.
But my program, basically, I learned, corporations, government, all conspire against the common folk
Mm.
to make life a certain way.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I was very delusioned and jaded by the end of my 4 years. I was like, well, I guess I could be a journalist and like perpetuate this machine,
Right. Be told what to
or
say and what to write. And
yeah, or like
yeah.
go into advertising. And what's my legacy? Like making people want to have craft dinner?
Yeah.
Like, is that what I gonna
Yeah.
do for the rest of my life? So I sort of like went the opposite way. I did work in advertising for 2 years or about out of college. And then I just like pursued whatever was on my heart. I was very, very typical millennial, switching jobs at the drop of a hat,
Yeah.
being like, I like this, I like that, let me
Yeah.
chase my passion. And that's how I ended up becoming a yoga teacher at one point.
Okay.
That was my most recent steady job before I had children. So
Mm.
yeah. And then, life gets interrupted by two little boys and
Yeah. And you just kind of squeeze everything else in between. Yeah.
exactly. You try
Yeah.
to like live your full adult life in between the
Yeah.
moments. It's very challenging, as you know, as a parent.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then during COVID times
Hmm.
in 2020, what really tipped me off to what was going on was the censorship in the news media
Yeah.
and how they were reporting the things. I was like, oh, this is weird. Typically, I don't really watch the news because I knew the news was all BS because of
Yeah.
my program.
Right.
I would usually watch it and analyze it anyway and pick it apart and like tell my family, like, well, they're saying this because this, or saying this because that.
Yeah.
So I was sort of always doing that my whole life. I started to just speak out on my own personal Instagram, and social media. And yeah, that's sort of just how I started talking about it informally.
Yeah.
And then I think in June 2022, well, earlier in 2022, NY and I connected over some stuff with Q and
Mm.
the Order of Quetzalcoatl and
Right.
this sort of like in sharing information back and forth. And he was like, you know what? Why don't you just come on and talk about it? And I was like,
Nice.
all
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how it started. And then Spiritual Gangsters came about in June 2022 because I felt like a lot of people had a similar experience to me where they sort of wanted to share their waking up moment, their
Yeah.
red pill stories,
Yeah.
how they've connected with so many interesting people over the last few years, like
Yeah.
yourself. It's it's a wonderful thing that's going on. It's this like phenomenon.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And it's interesting how many people woke up during COVID too. Like when there was an attempt to mass control the narrative, how many people were like, something's going on here. And
Right?
that's how I ended up starting the podcast too, is I was running it for
Nice.
this paranormal group that used to have monthly meetings, and
Yeah.
they're like, well, we can't meet in person anymore. So does somebody want to host a podcast? And like, hey,
Mm,
Nathan, we've had you speak before. Are you interested? And yeah, jumped on board during that time, and
that's awesome.
yeah, I kind of fell in love with it. So,
Yeah.
but it's I think one of the biggest tells that came out during that time too was that no matter which side of the political spectrum you're on, or if you're apolitical, you have to admit that just there was inconsistencies in the stories across the board. I remember at one point
Yeah.
during early 2020, there was an article, and I have a screenshot of it, of uh this bulldozer in New York City bulldozing homeless bodies into to mass graves from
Oh
COVID
God.
and stuff.
Okay.
And then later on it's like, well, it's actually, just a severe flu, and then it just kind of tapered off from there too. So
Yeah.
that led a lot of people to go, okay, well, who owns these news stations and
Right.
newspapers and journals? And it's like, oh, there's 6 companies that own every major news, radio, and television network in the, yeah. So
Very good, sir. See, this part I already knew
yeah.
from my degree. So it was
Yeah.
like, I remember a friend of mine telling me whispers of COVID in like November 2019. And she
Yeah.
sent me this podcast from the New York Times. And she was like, oh my God, you have to listen to this. It's so scary
Yeah.
if it's true. And da, da, da. And I didn't even listen to it. And I was like, girl, just letting you know, New York Times, owned by so and so,
Yeah.
probably pushing such and such agenda. Take it
Yeah.
with a grain of salt. Maybe it is true.
Yeah.
And I admit, when, COVID first hit, I was cautious. I was like, oh, okay, like they're obviously reporting something. Maybe they're not telling the whole truth, but it's something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the first couple of weeks, I was a little bit, cautious and nervous for my kids, and my husband
Mhm.
was still working as normal and everything. And then what I started to notice was like on the news reports, they'd give all these statistics. They just throw like all these numbers at you, right? To confuse you.
Yeah.
And so then I started getting a paper and pen and writing down the numbers they were saying. And then I'd like do the math on it, of what they said was supposed to be with the numbers. And I'm like, that doesn't even calculate.
It's not adding up. Yeah.
No, it's
Like literally not adding up. Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
then I started to go online, and I don't know if you can still find these statistics, maybe they're gone, but like flu numbers to compare, in the past with Canada, the
Yeah.
US, flu deaths. There was more flu deaths, I think, I remember seeing 2018 and
Mm.
2012. I remember 2012 because my son was born that year. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, damn, I didn't even know
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
going on, right?
Right.
Because they didn't need us to know at the time. So,
Yeah. It's funny where some of the panic happened too. Like here now, Alberta, at least in Edmonton, we had a toilet paper shortage.
oh,
And
yeah,
like we're
same.
going to all these stores and there's no toilet paper. And I'm like, okay, like I have guns and ammo. I thought the first thing
Nice.
that would have been gone across the board was guns and ammo, but it's toilet paper and
Of all the
diapers.
things, right? I mean, if we
Yeah.
really need, we could wipe with a leaf. We
Yeah.
can get baby wipes. Like, there's a
Coffee
plethora,
filters, like there's yeah.
plethora of objects you could use. I don't know what was with the toilet paper thing. Same here in Toronto.
Yeah.
I do remember grocery shopping on like, I think it was the Thursday before all chaos ensued, and I remember this heaviest feeling in the air. I
Yeah.
remember just feeling people's energy around me, so afraid.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I was like, oh, no good groceries are going to be left, right? Like, because
Yeah.
people are, not wanting to leave their homes, stock up. And it was so funny. I was like, oh, actually, everything I usually buy is pretty much in stock because I tend to buy organic as much as I can.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I guess people are really just like grabbing for the Eggos and like, I was like, oh,
The
okay, I
healthy,
guess, well,
nutritious options. Yeah.
you still got organic bananas, guys, and organic rice is still on the shelf.
Yeah.
Tuna, like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
set. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that was
think one of the
funny.
things that freaked me out was just learning that grocery stores have a 3 day shelf life
Mm,
for stocking and restocking. So in 3 days,
yes.
everything could be gone and picked up, and then you're left to. So I'd like to get more into prepping. We live in a townhouse, so our backyard is like this concrete slab, so we don't have a garden. But I'd love to get more into prepping and providing for yourself during
Yeah,
times
that
like
is
this.
cool. Although you're ahead of the curve with the guns and ammo, because I think
Yeah,
a
I
lot
can
of
just go rob people of their veggies
you
and
want sell them up at gunpoint or go
yeah,
hunt somewhere,
yeah. Go to a
I know,
farmer, say, "Give me your cow. I have some
right?
steak tonight."
Give me some meat.
Yeah.
Yeah, the prepping stresses me out though. Ugh,
Yeah.
I don't know. In one way I get it, and I have a basic pantry. Like we live in a bungalow. It's not a big house by any means, but
Yeah.
we have a small pantry. But just like I'm Italian, so generally we keep extra stuff like on hand in general. It's
Yeah.
part of just like in my blood, I guess. I don't
Yeah.
have a ton, but I mean,
Yeah.
there's stuff we could eat, I suppose. Because I know some people, they really go crazy with it. And just for me, it creates a nervousness in me and an unsettled feeling that I feel like energetically, this is my yoga side coming out.
Yeah.
Energetically, I don't feel like it's productive for me or safe. Like I don't feel safe in my, I'd rather have the mentality that like everything is good,
Mm.
everything is okay, and therefore it will be. Whereas if I am preparing for panic, panic
Right.
will ensue.
Yeah.
It's my
Yeah.
thought.
It
Yeah.
it I think we shared about this in a previous episode, just the old analogy of training uh pilots, right? You don't
Yeah.
focus on the object you're trying to avoid, you focus on where you want to go, because if you
Yeah.
focus on the object you want to avoid, you start drifting. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it applies. It's if you're always anxious about everything, then you don't have a calm mindset or focus to
Exactly.
try and
Yeah,
work
I
more.
guess it depends how you approach the prepping. Like
Yeah.
shout out to the preppers who really like kill it in the prepping game. Like
Yeah.
you guys are
They
amazing.
hope it's going to happen because they will be living their best
I'll be
life.
like, fuck yeah, I get to open my 25-year food can. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it was years ago that I ordered this survival pack off InfoWars, and it's
Oh,
like this pack of dehydrated food, and it's got something like 50 meals in it, but the packs of dehydrated foods are like the size of a tea bag almost, and I'm like,
oh my God.
yeah, I guess
Do they
that's gonna.
expand
They
if you put
do,
water
they
and it's
do,
like,
and the
boop?
reviews of how they taste online, the people are like, this tastes like paper, but it'll
Oh,
keep you alive.
it'll keep you alive. Exactly. Ah, I know. And then we have these movies coming out like Leave the World Behind.
Yeah. And then
Every celebrity's talking about their bunker, like all of a sudden.
there was
Ugh.
the series on Netflix as well, or Disney Plus about the rich uh
The Last of Us?
tech. No, it wasn't The Last of Us.
Eh?
It was about these rich tech people and industry leaders who have
Oh,
a bunker in Antarctica, I think,
oh,
and
great.
they've prepared for the world ending, and we haven't finished it yet, so I can't give any spoilers, but
Well, I want
we
to watch
watched
that.
that right after watching Leave the World Behind, and we're like, oh, and then we saw the news of Mark Zuckerberg building
Yeah.
his bunker in Hawaii, which I don't know why you'd build a bunker in Hawaii, but hey,
A lot of very wealthy people seem to be very interested in Hawaii, and I wonder why that
yeah,
is. And I just for on the Spiritual Gangsters podcast, we do Clown World Weekly as of
yeah,
late. I think we started that in September just because of my interest in current events and news. So I sort of get to be the journalist I always wanted to be,
nice,
just in
yeah,
like a rogue way, which is
yeah.
probably what I should have done out of school.
And
Just
it
been like,
sounds way cooler too. It's
right?
yeah, yeah,
There's been this like rogue independent journalist or whatever, but we basically just pick apart news stories and whatnot. But what's come out of doing that show is really interesting because I have to pay attention to news stories, which I wouldn't probably normally do or not in as an organized way. And I've noticed a lot of patterns come out of that,
mm,
which is really interesting. So, like for when you're saying like Leave the World Behind came out, and then the Mark Zuckerberg bunker, and then
yeah,
I think we've covered two or three other celebrities who've recently come out and like talked about their bunker.
yeah,
And it's like,
yeah,
why all of a sudden now? Like, is this to put
yeah,
fear on
right,
purpose? Is this to, make us panic? I don't
yeah,
know. Or is it
yeah,
like the Luciferian, like karma clearing? Like, oh, we told you, get a bunker,
yeah.
but
Well,
you didn't do it. So
and one of the yeah, it's almost like predictive programming, right? And
maybe.
one of the things that it reminds me of is socioeconomic privilege of
Mm.
the elite, right?
Haves
And
and the have-nots.
yeah, there's a major cryptocurrency crash. And I don't know too much about cryptocurrency, but there was a cryptocurrency crash a couple years ago that almost brought down the crypto market. It was called
Hmm.
the Luna token, and the founder was just arrested because, and he had been on the run from country to country because he had tipped off all of his rich whale investors in it days before, and they withdrew all of their money.
Oh,
There's people
wow.
who committed suicide after this coin crashed because they had all of their
Oh,
finances in it. And when you see things like that, you know it's not just a conspiracy, right? You know that this information coming out is not just a conspiracy. It's like there is, deals happening behind the scenes. There's stuff shifting behind the scenes. So it's yeah,
absolutely.
best
Yeah,
to
and
be aware.
that's well, remember one line in Leave the World Behind. The main character, I forget his name, sorry, the guy who owns the house,
Yeah,
who's like in the know or whatever. He says to one of the other characters, he goes, "Well, what if nobody's in charge?"
right.
And I was like, "Ooh, that's maybe even scarier thought."
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, it's
what if it's
chaos.
just this chaos set in motion and all
Yeah.
these little groups vying for power and they orchestrate, a lot of the chaos in the world? That was an interesting thought because I think sometimes as conspiracy theorists or truth seekers, we tend
Yeah.
to maybe give a little too much credit
Yeah.
to the bad guys or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. And I do think there are shadowy cabals, but I don't know if there's like, a League of Shadows style cabal that sits over top of the world type thing. I think it's
Yeah,
people grabbing their pieces of the pie. The George Soros, and his name gets brought up a lot, but it's true.
yeah.
And even with things like Bohemian Grove, which we covered in one of our other episodes, where
Nice.
these rich people are going to worship owl god, and they carry out mock sacrifices that used to be real sacrifices that they have photos
Yes.
of back in the day, and they carve up the world at these meetings, and there's precedence for it. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even in my university program, I was very lucky. Maybe it was the time that I was in school, but it was right off the heels of 9/11.
oh
So
yeah,
I was in university from 2002 to 2006.
yeah,
And a lot of my professors were very into the idea of conspiracy. And sort of, I mean, at the time it was like Michael Moore,
right,
his
yeah,
Fahrenheit 9/11. Um, Also Alex Jones was like just like coming out. He would have been the
yeah,
only one you really would have been able to listen to formally.
yeah,
But yeah, a lot of our professors introduced us to the Trilateral Commission,
yeah,
the Council of Foreign Relations, the Committee of 300, Club of Rome. Like all these things was common knowledge to me at 19 years old.
right,
So I was
yeah,
like, oh, well, I guess we're fucked.
yeah. Just from the beginning.
And I was like, okay,
Yeah,
well, there it is. And then I remember saying this in school. I was like, well, I guess the Amish have it right.
right, yeah.
They're the ones that live like the most in the way that we probably should
They
live.
make their own clothes, they harvest their own food. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, very anti-materialistic,
Communal, and
anti-capitalist, I would
yeah,
say.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
mean, in a way, university turned me into a little bit of a left-leaning sympathizer.
yeah, yeah,
But then now it seems with a lot of social engineering, everything has flipped.
right.
And I'm like, okay, I guess you're either on the side of truth and good or you're not.
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
don't know.
it's funny because people are like, well, which end of the political spectrum are you on? It's like, well, neither, because I don't trust
The
anyone.
side that makes the most common sense,
Yeah,
like
and it's
that's.
like I vote and stuff still. I still
Mhm,
believe people should vote, but
mhm,
there are narcissists and sociopaths on each end of the spectrum.
absolutely.
It's yeah.
Exactly.
So, Teresa, just to shift focus a bit here, because I want to get to this, but in your bio, we talked about you having an interest in exorcisms. Was that just always an interest for you? I know you said some of these topics interested you from a young age, like angels and demons, but
Yeah.
was there something that initially sparked your interest in exorcisms and the spiritual laws of the demonic realm, or did
Um,
that develop over time?
yeah, so I think it's something that's come about probably more so in the last few years, but I do remember I think it speaks to like my religious upbringing, understanding good and evil in those terms of like, angels, devils, demons, whatever.
Yeah.
But I did read The Screw Tape Letters by C.S.
Oh,
Lewis.
C.S. Lewis. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I read that in high school and it really impacted me because it just showed or gave the idea of like the banality of evil.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
evil actually is not this like big scary devil with horns and
Yeah.
or crazy traumatic things like wars or rape or murder. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that.
Yes.
Evil
Yeah.
can operate as simple as like tempting you to judge somebody
Yeah.
silently in your mind or
Yeah.
like having a bad attitude and you snap at somebody and then therefore they then go about their day in a certain way and
Yeah.
how sin just like pervades and spreads
Yes. Yeah.
like this web of subtle evil, I
Like a
would call it.
cancer. It's
Exactly,
yeah.
like a cancer, yeah. So that kind of changed my perspective on like how evil and bad sort of permeates through the world.
Hmm.
And then really I guess another like key moment in my awakening more so in the last few years was understanding the story of like the fallen angels. And maybe some of your listeners are familiar, like Genesis 6 conspiracy.
Right.
So
The
the idea,
Nephilim and
yes,
yeah.
of like the
Yeah.
giants and the Nephilim and how that maybe is more so a war on our DNA as
Mm.
like sons of Adam and daughters of Eve.
Right.
So that I think combined with my religious background, I started to sort of seek out more heavily religious content, I
Mm.
would say, like online. And then I sort of would come across like certain priests who were very outspoken during the pandemic, and a lot of them happened to be exorcists. And I was like, how do these people seem to get what's going on
Right.
more, whereas other religious people seem very oblivious? So I started to take their word with more weight, and I feel like the exorcist priests just they know so much because they actually sit and battle with demons for real,
In the
like
trenches type thing.
in the trenches,
Yeah.
like in a
Yeah.
formal manner,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So a lot of like the things that they would say about how sin works, or how God allows like someone to be possessed.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, like the demons and the devils can only do what God allows. So like the devil is still God's devil.
Right.
And I was
Yeah.
like, ooh, that's an interesting concept. Like I never really thought of it that way before. So even when we see like all these crazy evils in the world with wars or the pandemic or whatever, these are all for a reason. And like
Right.
we were saying, I think before the show started recording, we were saying like so many people woke up during this
During the time.
time.
Yeah.
And is that why God allows tragedy to occur?
Right.
Perhaps,
Yeah.
because a lot of good can come from it. And I think that's all
Yeah.
throughout the Bible.
Hmm.
You always see God using these horrific, strange, weird, sinful situations and then turns it around for the
Something
good
good comes from it. Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
end. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
mm,
Well, even as we were talking about screw tape letters, I remember there was one instance of this. I think he was a construction worker, and he came across a pamphlet talking about truth and hope and love, and he started to get drawn into it when one of the demons is like, "Hey, like that remember what that person said to you," or it was something like that. It was something to distract them, and it
mm,
wasn't, this physical attack. It was the banality that you were talking about. It was as
yeah.
simple as trying to throw them off. And I think we
Yeah.
often forget that in our day-to-day world, that it's very much beneath the surface.
Absolutely.
with
Yeah.
um with exorcisms, there's a priest, you may have heard of him, Father Malachi Martin, at all.
Yes.
Yeah, and he goes into UFOs, he goes into all sorts of interesting
Yeah, like they
topics.
know
And
stuff, these
yeah.
guys. I'm telling you, they know what's up.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yes. So, sorry, you were going to say about Malachi Martin.
No, and just there's large parts of any religious organization that I distrust, right?
For
From the
sure.
Catholic Church to
Agree.
Pentecostal, Baptist, etc.
Fully.
But
Yeah.
then you catch these you know jewels in the
Yes.
rubble that are searching, that are teaching, that are exposing, and it's really encouraging. And
Yeah, that's the thing. It's very refreshing to come across them, and they
yeah,
speak with such conviction a
yeah,
lot of the time. There's
yeah,
one guy, maybe I would recommend it to you and the listeners. If you're ever curious to check out hearing from an exorcist, two that come to mind that are amazing to hear. One is Father Chad Ripperger,
okay,
and then another one is Father Dan Rehill. His
yeah,
personal story is very convincing
mhm,
and very amazing to me because he used to live like a Wolf of Wall Street life
okay,
before
yeah,
becoming a priest. And now, he's a
yeah,
Catholic exorcist. Like that's pretty crazy to me.
yeah, it's a big
So, I mean, if he
transformation.
believes and he sees what's up,
Yeah,
maybe we could listen to him a little bit. So,
yeah, because he's been behind the scenes, right?
he's been on both sides of the coin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Have you had any personal experiences that really solidified or cemented your belief in exorcisms, or did you come
Mm,
across any personal stories that you heard that keep you up at night?
no, not really. I mean,
Well,
I've
lucky
never,
you.
I know, right? I don't think I've ever come across like that to my knowledge, like someone who was formerly possessed. Although now that I'm more aware of it, I do see maybe the influence of the demonic in the sense of like oppression or like
Yeah,
maybe more mental illness that we think is mental illness or anxiety, depression, addiction. We just write those things off as mental health, but maybe they're actually not in
sure.
a lot of cases.
Yeah,
Maybe it's a demonic oppression for whatever reason. So
yeah,
I starting to like look at the world with different spiritual eyes
yeah,
than I had before. And,
yeah,
I can say from my time in yoga and whatnot, I used to think more so that there was like many paths to the top of the same mountain,
right,
but now I'm not so sure.
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
Nope.
all I will
That's
say about that.
no, it's good to challenge people in their own views, right? It's
Yes,
like, okay, why do you believe what you believe, and what's the evidence, or what's the philosophy to back it? And
right.
I think people tend to think of in terms of a Christian worldview, I think they tend to think, nominal Christians tend to think of Christianity as God and then his equal opposite, the devil. But
Mm,
it's so many of these images come from people who weren't Christian or weren't Catholic. And I mean, the devil is a fallen angel, right? He's not a God. And even with hell and hell being a fiery place and that inspiration coming from Dante, and
mm,
when a lot of these images don't come from the Bible or from sources themselves. So
yeah.
is there another area that you especially like talking about with your podcast, the type of topic that gets you thinking, I'm actually helping to expose the darkness happening around the world? And an example I could give you is one of the ones I did for this paranormal group, and then we did it again for Midnight Mysteries just because I really enjoy talking about it. Is stuff like Pizzagate, when
Mm,
the pizzeria shooting happened or the guy marched into the
yes.
pizzeria. I was super skeptical. I'm like, okay, this guy has clearly spent too many hours in conspiracies on the internet, and he's spent too much time on Reddit
Right.
and everywhere else. But then I started looking into it
Mm.
and came across something called the Finders Cult, which I don't know if you're aware of, but
I've heard of it. I believe
yeah,
NY might have covered it before.
they
Yeah.
were a rich cult that would traffic children, and they had tunnels beneath
Hmm.
businesses in Washington, from restaurants to schools to offices, and they would smuggle children through these tunnels. And then all of a sudden, this pizzeria is accused of having tunnels beneath its grounds, and it's not as far-fetched
No.
as people thought it was. And then images start coming out of their basement and creepy stuff in the pizzeria's basement. And
Yep.
that was one of the topics where I felt, wow, this is actually providing some truth to contrary what the media is sharing in the news. And
Yes.
it felt much more real. Is there something for you that kind of gets your blood going and you feel like I'm helping awake awaken the masses?
Yeah, I think, well, that's amazing that you guys covered that because I think some people do tend to shy away from like the child trafficking issue. So, kudos to you guys because I think that was huge in my awakening as well. Is I mean, I know people will like, laugh about Q or whatever. I agree, there's
Yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of silliness there, but probably the one thing that is very true
yeah.
about the whole Q information, and if you go down that rabbit hole, is the child trafficking piece. So,
Right. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's what keeps people like, oh, maybe this is all real because that part is very real.
Right. Or
Anyway,
there's nuggets of truth buried in
nuggets,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think on my show so far, a couple things that stand out. Well, just from sharing people's stories, there's been a couple people's conversion stories or spiritual journeys that have really resonated with people. I do know one that's probably the most popular episode that we have is Zachary King.
Okay.
So he was a high level Satanist,
Yeah.
and then ended up converting to Catholicism in
Okay.
his life. So his story is pretty intriguing, whether you believe it fully or not, because I know some people are skeptical of his testimony,
Sure.
but I mean, it's a pretty incredible story.
Yeah.
And then I think, we do tend to like expose pop culture, so Hollywood, breaking down symbolism, music industry, sort of kind of thing. Because I know a lot of people are very wrapped up in that, and it
Yeah.
is entertaining. I get it. Like I went through a whole phase. I also teach Zumba for fun, as a hobby. And that used to be like my part-time job before COVID, in addition
Yeah.
to being a mom. So I lost that job because of that. But
Mm.
then once I started diving down rabbit holes about the music industry and realizing, maybe ties to Pizzagate sort of things and
Right. Yeah.
the darkness of that, I went through a whole period where I could barely even listen to music at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think you have to find some balance because we still do have to live in the real world.
Yeah.
Another thing through the podcast that I think has helped a lot of people understand the current climate is discussions about the black nobility.
Okay.
So I don't know if you guys have ever talked about that on the show.
No, we haven't.
Okay, so that's like, how we talk about sort of like the hidden hand behind all the hands, like who is the they?
Okay, the
when we
cabal
talk
or
about they.
the
Yeah, and
shadow
just
government or whatever. Yeah, yeah,
exactly. And then like going back into those like bloodlines and how that ties back into like Genesis 6. And this is
right.
like ancient stuff.
Yeah,
And I think a lot of people, we're not that privy to it.
yeah.
So yeah, I think that's definitely helped broaden people's horizons. And then
Hmm.
just having these discussions, I think in general, like a lot of people still, I don't think have a very big sense of community around them,
Sure.
like in their real life when they want to talk about like what they're thinking is going on in the world. And it helps like foster that sense of community, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
When I think with, despite where any of our listeners may be at, maybe you don't believe in spirituality or conspiracies, you have to admit that absolute power corrupts and power corrupts absolutely. And people who have it all want more power and they lust for it, right? And so
Yes.
again, maybe you're not a conspiracy theorist, but when you look at some of these celebrities in the music industry or in politics, they're just going to continue doing what they have to do to have that power. And I think Epstein's list has kind of exposed a bit of that. People
Mm,
who wanted to sabotage and corrupt children because it was,
yeah.
off limits. And even with people like Alex Jones, I remember listening to a Joe Rogan episode where somebody was making fun of Alex Jones, and Joe Rogan is like, "Well, wait, I'm friends with Alex Jones, and yeah, he says some crazy stuff, but when he's right, he's right." And I
Mm.
think we all have to be aware of where our biases are and where our blinders are at. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, always keep questioning. Although maybe you get to a point like I am at right now where I'm just like, I'm sitting in an unknowing and in a confusion.
yeah,
Sometimes it's like info overload, or you come across like competing information a lot of the time and you don't know what to do with it.
sure,
So sometimes I'm like, right now I'm in a period where I'm just sitting in like unknowing. I
yeah,
don't know what is the right answer a
yeah,
lot of the time. And I'm like, all right, we're just we're
yeah,
just sitting in it. I always say this phrase, observe, don't absorb.
right. Nope,
And I
that's
think
good.
that's
Yeah,
important to keep in mind, as much as it is interesting to
yeah,
dive down rabbit holes and consider the paranormal or what's behind the veil.
yeah,
A lot of the time too, like we can talk about it and observe it, but don't carry it on you
sure. Yeah,
afterwards. Just
yeah,
like, okay,
yeah.
just leave it there because you still have to function. you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah,
real life exists too, right? It's
exactly.
like you said, the day to day, it's for us, it's changing diapers and potty
I
training.
still
Well,
gotta make dinner and
yeah,
wash dishes and get my kid to hockey.
well,
So,
reading about the global cabal.
I feel bad sometimes for my kids because I don't like to sugarcoat a lot for them. And I don't teach them in absolutes. I just present possibilities.
Absolutely. This is
So
the
like
information. Do with it what you
I'm
will,
like,
right?
some
And
people think this, some people think that. What do you think?
yeah,
It's funny. I wonder how they'll grow up sometimes, like already having these doubts
yeah,
or questions in their mind, or how my husband and I handled the COVID period,
yeah.
how that will impact them later on. I think I'm already seeing little bits of that, which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. It's like you can't tell what to believe, but you can tell them to search for the truth because truth is absolute. It's not, everybody doesn't have their own truth like we like to be told sometimes. It's like truth
Yeah,
is central. Everybody has their own experience, but truth is truth. And
exactly.
if you search for it, I think you'll find it. And if sometimes I get stuck in analysis paralysis is what it's
Yes.
called, and
Yes.
sometimes I have to be like, okay, it's sink or swim, and I'd rather just swim and figure it out along the way, right?
Yeah. Sometimes just go with the flow, right? And you're like, okay.
Yeah. And I think something important for all of us truthers is that, you can't tell what people what to believe, but you can question what they believe. You can say, well, like, what do you think of this? And then they start going, I wonder about that. And you kind of walk them to the truth when you get them questioning things. So,
Yes.
yeah, it's really
Yeah.
cool, Teresa.
Yeah. Thank you.
Tonight, we talked about exorcisms, we talked about COVID, we talked about who's behind the scenes of journalism and the media and pulling pulling the strings there, and we introduced our new co-host for Midnight Mysteries in our segment, Things That Go Bump in the Night. Do you know somebody that has been possessed? Have you started to wake up during this time yourself and have seen the truth behind what's being portrayed to us in the media and what's not necessarily true? We would love to connect with you. Send a message or add your thoughts and comments below, and we'll respond right back. Thanks for joining us tonight. Remember, stay weird, and we'll see you next time on Midnight Mysteries. Have a good night.